There we go. The king and his dragon. Far away from here, there's a kingdom, and in the castle, there currently sits the king at banquet. The king is like no other king you've seen. The first thing you'll notice is the endless red dragon scale cloak that cascades down the stairs. A brass plate sits upon their chest, the greatest and most finite armor you'll have ever seen. Upon their head is a ragged crown of gold, with rubies like fire. And currently, all the heroes and knights and warriors are at banquet with this very king. You see, the king has asked for help, asked for aid across all the land. The kingdom has been very peaceful for years, ever since the king came down from the mountains. But the king now says that the dragon's greed will take over the kingdom, and a hero must stop it. So the king asks everyone gathered together, who here would face the dragon's greed and save the kingdom? And all of them cheer and say aye. Who here would do absolutely anything, do what must be done to face the dragon's greed, to save the kingdom? And they all cheer and say aye. Who here would even face me to save the kingdom at hand? And all of them but one laugh and jeer, thinking it's a joke, a jovial jest by the king, as mighty as they are. And it wasn't one of the heroes or warriors sat at the tables that didn't say anything at all. It was the courtier, a little assistant, a gentle-looking man in a cascading black dress. Quietly, while everyone else laughed, they said aye, and smiled at the king, presuming they were not seen. But the banquet was soon over, and the heroes went off on their quests. They were sent to all corners of the kingdom to find the dragon's greed, to source it out before it sourced them out. And so they did. Many heroes, many warriors, many knights of many different kinds, all went in different directions, doing all different things. Not one of them found the dragon's greed, though. They all found their own quests, don't worry. There was a knight who had to battle a terrible hydra whose heads would not stop growing back. They would learn a lesson, as the old heroes had, that fire would be the trick. Another very regal individual indeed, dressed all high in armor, plumes of feathers in their helmet, didn't do any fighting whatsoever. They found a family whose donkey had gotten too tired to take them all the way home, and so had lifted the cart between their arms and taken it with them. They took that family all the way to the next town over. The entire time everyone was gone, they were helping. Probably one of the most impressive stories is of a mighty woman who carried two broad shields on either arm. She had decided to fistfight a giant who had claimed ownership over a farmer's daughter, whom she herself had been flirting with. I can tell you now, she won the fight. It was quite impressive to watch too. But not one of them found the dragon's greed. Now, while everyone else was adventuring, going off questing and helping innocents, the king sat sullen on their throne. Their assistant came through into the room, bowed gently. May I challenge you, sire? The king smiled. By what means? To this, the courtier revealed a chessboard. Now, their version of chess takes a little longer to play and a little bit more complicated than ours. Just as fun, I assure you. A battle of wits and minds. And the king liked this idea very much, and nodded with a smile, stepped down from their throne to a table in the middle of the room, and they began to play. It took them the whole day to play, in fact. Many frowns, many chuckling jests, many moments that seemed close, but in the end, the game came to a close. The assistant smiled, placed their piece forward on the board, and nodded. Checkmate. The king smiled for the briefest moment until that sullen look returned to them, and their head dropped. Now, said the assistant. You can't be so sore a loser. I have bested you, have I not? By your words, surely I have saved the kingdom. The king looked up, surprised, a sad look in their eyes. It's not so easy to quell such a terror. My assistant reached out a hand and gently touched her cheek. Or maybe that terror is not so terrible. You've described the greed that will plague us as quite awful. I know it all too well. Before you looked as you did, you were indeed a terrible ruler. Before you went up to those mountains to face that dragon the first time. And greed is exactly how I'd describe it. But it came from no dragon. Just a simple man. You do not scare me, my liege. And with this, a terrible rumble echoed around the chamber. A growl that could not come from any chest of a man, human or not. And the king's visage changed dark. The cape seemed to stretch out, and wings were replaced where that cape once sat. The enormous chest grew wider and wider, and instead of there being a gentle-faced king draped in red and gold, there was now a dragon, fierce eyes looking down, and a low rumbling growl echoing through their throat. They whispered in a harsh voice that seemed not that loud, considering how big they were. I am greater than you can possibly know, and more terrible than I wish I ever was. They paused. They paused because the assistant had reached out and placed their hand upon their nose again, and chuckled. You are no more terrible than any, and your rule here and your time has been plentiful and wonderful. Not a single one of us has thought ill of you. And it was quite a reputation for you to gain, considering the face you wear. And as soon as the dragon had appeared, the dragon disappeared, leaving the king there instead, holding the assistant's hand in their hand. And before they could say another thing to deter the assistant from possibly trying to help them, the assistant was there. His kind man's face pressed against the king's in a gentle kiss. If you were so terrified that your rule, you in charge of all this, will summon your greed and terror, you can go. I will let you. I have bested you, and you may leave. On one condition. You return. The king was dumbfounded at this, but before they spoke, they thought better of it, and smiled, looking into eyes that were full of love and affection. They gently took off their crown and placed it on the table in front of them, nodded, and walked away. Days later, all the heroes and knights and warriors were joined together again, were back at feast, except for when they entered the chamber, instead of the original king being covered in brass armor with a cascading red cloak, there was a gentle-faced man sat on the throne with a cascading black dress that fell down the stairs. With a soft smile, they spoke, Enter, everyone. The king has chosen to face the dragon's greed themselves. They've gone once again into the mountains, and they will return when they are ready. They may never return. But as by their word, in their stead, I will sit here and lead you just as they did. And everyone cheered. There was something that no one understood, or at least no one said. Maybe everyone did understand. But they knew this was for the best. What they didn't know was the name or whereabouts of the new assistant who stood beside the throne, dressed all regally in red with gold buttons. They didn't know who they were at all, and nor did they need to, because their smile was entirely focused on the new king, and it was a smile full of love and affection.